Hi,
Good morning.
Caroline.
How are you?
Great, thank you. And thank you for joining for this. I'm sure it's
You're
going to be a
welcome.
magnificent conversation between you and
Me
me.
too. Me too.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. And let me start with your introduction for our guests. Our guest for today's interaction is Caroline Hughes, and she is an Irish national, a global citizen, dynamic woman with a zest for life. And her philosophy is to suck the marrow out of life, a quote she first heard when watching Dead Poets Society at age 15. She loves big business. She loves supporting leaders to make the most of their people and move beyond the lip service of people are our greatest asset to really creating the momentum through development that inspires people to be their best selves and make the most of their potential in service of bigger goals. And she has worked with over 800 leaders and their teams, building trust, increasing their effectiveness by working on who they're being and how they show up. And throughout her career, she climbed the corporate ladder. And at 39, she became the global director for leadership development in CRH, a building materials giant with 80,000 employees worldwide. And her key skills are deep listening, connecting, stakeholder management, relationship building, and a deep appreciation of how leaders can make the most of their potential and of their teams. She runs executive retreats during which they explore why should anyone be led by you? And Caroline, some of her proudest achievements include building a global leadership development function for leaders at all levels, supporting organizations to be objective about their future leaders and getting gender balance in their leaders of the future, leading large-scale transformation at the Central Bank of Ireland during the Irish economic bailout. And she has been invited to speak at the Global Mental Health Awareness Conference in New York about her burnout and learning the art of followership while hiking to Everest Base Camp, Kilimanjaro, Annapurna, Himalayas. And I think this was your most transformative phase, Caroline. In 2019, your burnout was as humbling as it was transformational, as you say. And in this, you realize that no matter how determined or ambitious you are, the body keeps the score. And it was your first time when you became your own personal head of change. And during this recovery, you discovered Deepak Chopra, Tony Robbins, Sydney Banks, Brandon Bays, which broadened your perspective and gave you tools to increase your resilience, which could also be shared with others. And this is what ultimately led you to the work of Michael Neal and Ankush Jain, and who then introduced you to the work of Steve Harrison and the Being Movement, which has accelerated your growth in ways which previously you hardly dared to dream of. And that is what we are really interested to listen from you, Caroline, today. How's been your journey, your transition, and your transition from your experience of life before coming into the Being Movement, or probably before you made that shift from your ambitious self to focusing on a being-centered life, creating a being-centered life. Would love to listen from you, Caroline.
Well, firstly, Ranjan, thank you so much for having me here this morning. I'm delighted to be with you because Mumbai was such an inspirational journey, and a very big part of my being there was the inspirational leadership you had around the journey. So I'm delighted, firstly, to
Thank you
be
so
here
much.
and have this conversation today, and thank you for such a generous introduction. It's kind of, I feel it's hard to follow that in some ways, but let me try. I guess firstly, my decision to leave, I suppose that I never knew this phrase, the corporate world, that until I became a coach and realized for me it was just going to work, and then I realized for other people it represented a world, and in which people existed. And, I think that was part of my experience there. I was very lucky to be in a role that was all about development, and although my business is only 3 years old, kind of my executive coaching business, I've been really coaching and mentoring leaders at all levels kind of throughout my life, and in fact, if friends come around my table, as they frequently do for dinner or for drinks or for conversation, they'll always say, well, nobody ever gets off the hook. You got to be prepared to have the conversation if you come here about what's really happening, because I've always had that infinite curiosity, both in my own kind of evolution and in that of others. So that's in part, I guess, what drew me to this movement, albeit, I will openly say, until Ankush started working with Steve Hardison, I had never heard of Steve. In fact, I only knew Ankush probably a month or two through his online presence at the time in which he started. And I remember one day finding myself catapulted into this Facebook group round about December 2021, where there was a lot of posts, there was a lot of love. And I was going, what is going on here? Like, how did I get here? I still don't actually know. I have a sense of how it happened, but I really don't know actually how I got into the group. And I've never really thought to ask the question. And kind of my journey with being, I would say, is in two halves through last year. Initially, this, I suppose, shy person on the sidelines trying to figure out what was happening here. As I developed my own way in the world, my own business, say I'm no stranger to self-development and personal growth, this had a different quality about it. And I remember kind of early last year, there was an event being launched somewhere in the States. Was it in Arizona? Judy was, I think it was the book launch.
Arizona. Yes.
In Arizona. And I remember seeing kind of all of the momentum that was building towards this event, and people saying that they were going and how excited they were, and people who were being featured as speakers and how excited people were to be in their presence. And it might have been Dave Orton or Eric Luffram. Somebody had a live stream kind of through the Facebook group at that time. And even with the time zone difference, I remember thinking, oh, okay, I'm going to just stay with this and see what this is about. And I remember kind of half in, half out, again, just being really honest about my journey to this, because kind of the change is so significant in a short period of time. It's kind of hard to believe that I remember kind of just sitting on my couch going, I don't understand what these guys are talking about. They're writing books, they're doing things. And I really kind of felt, okay, no, I'm going to stay with this, but I don't really know what's happening here. It's very similar to my early Facebook days. In fact, very similar I could see that pattern so many times, in my life, to get comfortable and to have to figure something out, and then at some point, Steve, I don't know whether it was the introduction to his speech or he made a comment. And he started to say, and I think he was shouting, or maybe I just received him as shouting at me because my listening wasn't so great. And I remember him saying, the power is in the listener. You decide, what are you listening for? What are you listening to? And I had these hot tears just literally coming out the sides of my eyes as I heard this message and realized, oh, I'm listening with judgment. I'm listening with, I have to figure something out. I'm so busy in my figuring out. I've just missed something significant. So let me stay now and listen to what remains. And that was where the shift for me began to take place, that this person in Steve was speaking differently about something I had heard so many times, I had spoken about so many times. How many leaders that I sat with and talked about, how to communicate effectively. How many times had I been giving presentations where we labored over what words to use so that a message could be received? But actually, that was just really a guise almost for the powerlessness of the speaker.
Mm.
And I felt in that, I felt my own vulnerability in that. And I felt a kind of a massive, I just didn't know that. I just kind of went, oh, I know something so completely today, that day in January 2022, that just really shifted not just my listening, but my coaching, but my life, but this message of the power is in the listening. And it's not about whether or not you're using your best words. It's about the environment that you're creating around how you're listening, and therefore the manner in which you speak. So I found myself ordering the book. I read the book, and even though the book said to read it about you, I read it about Steve. I read it as good information. And I kind of found myself going back to it time to time, just dipping in, to read a chapter here or read a chapter there. And then through last year, of course, then Matt Smith had decided, like you did later in the year, to have the event in London in April. And I could see that Ankush was very involved. And again, Ankush kind of was my link still at this point. Even though there was this whole Facebook group happening, I did not feel part of that.
Mm.
And that was my separation rather than anything that was happening, within the Facebook group itself. And the weekend that the event was happening in London, I was committed to another week-long development program that was finishing at lunchtime on that Saturday. So it wasn't possible for me to be in London. And again, I watched this positive momentum build towards an event that at that moment, because of other commitments, I could not do. And I tried. I looked at flights to Heathrow because I live in Ireland. It's about an hour flight. And I looked to see, I wonder if I had a flight that landed at lunchtime, would that work? And that just wasn't possible. That was not the spirit of the event, first of all, and secondly, I needed to honor my own commitments as well. And so I kind of had this half in, half out. They say you can't be nearly pregnant, so I was kind of nearly being and not being, and really in the conversation, curious around it, but not in the conversation. And when you started talking about India, I thought, that's interesting. Wow, this is going to be in India. I previously had no draw whatsoever to India. And even though my very good friend Jill used to tell me it was the place I had to go to, I hadn't much curiosity because I love Nepal and I love the Himalayas. And I thought, that's sufficient for me, And being in Ankush's coaching school, which started in September, again, kind of shifted something for me. That actually here is a group of people who are kind of, vibing similarly to the way that I am, showing up similarly to the way that I am, and I'm choosing to not engage. So I got involved in the connection bingo that was at an early stage at that time. And was very fortunate, I think, in the first or second pairing that I was paired with Anne-Marie Gregson O'Halloran. And I was telling her this story that I had of, the half in, half out. And she said something very kind, but what I received was, what's wrong with you?
Mm.
Why is it that with a group of people whose only offering available is love, is acceptance, is encouragement, why do you decide to be on the sidelines? And they are not her words, I'm quite sure of that, but that was the message I received. And it was another moment, like the powers in the listener of January. I'm sitting in my car on a Zoom call that didn't work, so we're on Facebook Messenger with tricky Wi-Fi signals, and this message is coming through loud and clear. Step in, step in, step in and see what's possible. And very shortly after, this is where things accelerated. Ankush gets announced as a speaker. He may have been your first speaker announced, Ranjan. I can't remember specifically. And
Yes.
I remember congratulating him.
Yes.
And he set me a challenge. He just said back, thanks so much, Caroline. Of all the people who can make it to India, I think he said, this is a no-brainer for you. And in that moment, I went, oh my goodness, I'm watching this conversation about the event coming to India. I never even considered to go because I was in my thinking of, I'm going to watch this. And I just said, yeah, I can absolutely be there. And then I think I messaged you pretty much immediately. And it was very early days before there were hotel reservations in place. And
Yes.
I remember you rang me like that
Yes.
Saturday, it was morning, my time, to have a
Yes.
conversation. And I said, well, I think I said to you, look, if I'm going to India, I'm going to do this. I'm going to India. I'm going to get myself ready. And we really connected over our mutual love and appreciation of Sri Ramana Maharshi.
And I have
And
this gift. I have this gift that you brought for me. And see, that's how I see a miracle happening. What a miracle. My whole life, I couldn't go there. And I had this dream of having at least something from Sri Ramana Maharishi's place. And you come from all the way from UK. You come to attend the experience, and you bring me this. This is a miracle. Thank you so much, Caroline. It means a lot to me. Yeah.
In a funny way, Ranjan, as we talked about at the time, when I couldn't go to the event in London, it was because I was on a retreat where I learned about these teachings.
Yes.
Your mission to have the ultimate experience in India suddenly made it possible for me. I only learned of his teachings in April, and suddenly in November, I'm contacting the Brandon Bays community where I learned of his teachings, and I have a place in the ashram itself. And so when you talk about, miracles that happen, this was such an easy yes for me. And I think my commitment, although it might have been unspoken at the time, was this is about me kind of really being open. Because in the other times where I've had a chance to step in, where I've chosen to stay in analysis or chosen to wait and see, because that's where I was at that moment. This was a full in, put on the oxygen tank and go deep. And that's where things really, so many stories, of course, subsequently of everyone's journey of getting to Mumbai. Like, this was mine. This was an easy yes. The first easy yes of this movement. And the more I said yes, the funny thing was, the less it became about Steve, the more it became about me, the more it became about who I was becoming in order to be fully present, fully open on the 25th of February. I think it was 6:30 in the morning when we met that morning.
Yes.
That's I probably didn't see that in the process of getting there, but as I reflect on it, like, this has been an unfurling for me. This has been an unfolding that has had remarkable ease, grace. I've had a real certainty to my step as I've moved towards and subsequent to my experience in India. So, I love that you have the stone, because that's such a vivid memory for me that morning that I accidentally walked up a mountain barefoot because I thought it was a very short distance. And I had nothing with me. And the only thing that I didn't even have a pocket, was that stone in my hand.
Yes. I still
That had
remember
committed.
you sent me a photograph of the place where you picked up the stone from and
Yeah.
you messaged me on 20th of Feb, the pic, and I felt, wow, you know, how does this is how, universe works. When you step in, when you open up, you can't imagine the possibilities that can be created. And most of the times you are not even aware of what all is possible. You just step in and play the game, and you see the game unfolding, and it's always deeper and bigger and larger than the shallow self, that we apply to life. So, Caroline, I would like to know about the impact of all that you experienced in the process of creating this journey to India, and your experience of today, and your connections of all these things in your personal life, in your professional life, and the future that you are going to create.
Yeah, lovely. Thanks, Ranjan. Yeah. So maybe let me start with my experience of the day. And I guess when I think of the ultimate experience on the 25th of February, I just my kind of abiding memory is just being greeted with open arms. And all these hugs, it was like a hugathon,
Yeah.
where people who, a bit like we are now, we
It
exist
was
from the
it was like
shoulders up.
it was like we have known each other and
Yeah,
everybody for years. It was like a big family coming together
yeah,
after years.
exactly. Because I often refer to, the Zoomans, people who exist only on Zoom, and it's the shoulders up that we experience,
Yes.
and to see everyone who are names on pages of books, Facebook pages, ultimate book readings, or videos that had been created was just simply wonderful, and what a really joyous occasion to be part of. And I remember kind of sitting, and I think it was Steve in his introductory piece. He invited us all to look around and look at what had been so lovingly created for us. And I'm going, yeah, this team, this India team have just, conspired with the whole world to make this happen. And that's a very compelling place to come from.
Yes.
And there were so many moments of the day that really was so moving and so touching, and even the natural way in which each speaker was introduced by each member of the team, even that really moved me, that every member of the team who was involved in somehow in the creation of this event had their moment in the spotlight. And I really appreciated that. That really said so much to me about how this had come about, because it was this collective, this movement that was this growing momentum that was landing in Mumbai, India. And and listening to the speakers in the room, and really listening from, what is this, who would I be to have this conversation in this moment, and I remember being really struck, it's by a combination of Aluk and Amy's talks, really just has stayed with me, where even though this is not the order in which it was presented, but Amy opened her talking about default being, and default being is who we wake up as in the morning. It's the memories, it's the experiences, it's our thinking around what we think is possible. And at some point we almost interrupt that with this creation of who we want to be. And in my mind, and I have this here, look, I kind of created like a little chart,
Wow.
you default and then you create it, right? And the squiggly line in here is inspired by Aluk. Because what I experienced is that I saw something in what she said where, sometimes default being shows up. Sometimes old programming seems more available than the one we want to create.
Mm.
And I heard such compassion for ourselves in that statement. And what it really helped land very deeply for me was what Alok had said earlier about, this takes courage, this takes commitment to be in this active creation of who we want to be, who we are being. And his, I think it was his very last answer to your question, Ranjan, was love more, judge less, go deep.
Yes.
So in my graph, which is very rudimentary here, right?
Yes.
In this middle ground between the two, in this awareness of, I want to show up in this way, or I'm committed to showing and being in this way. But this, old programming, this default being sometimes appears. And as Steve would say, you clean up the mess if it needs to be, and you just get back to where you're going. But there's acceptance in that. There's loving yourself through it. There's dropping your judgment. And then there's the doing whatever work needs to be done so that that experience can be integrated. And that very clumsily drawn chart, but very from my heart, that got wired into the north of my compass that day.
Mm.
And when I look at that, particularly when I, in the context of my experience in Mumbai 2-3 days earlier on my tour that I did, and where I saw the ingenuity, the creativity, particularly when we visited the slum area, and I saw how creative people are, how ingenious people are to actually provide for themselves, to find ways to make a living, to find ways to be productive, to find ways to contribute, not just to their family, but to their society. Because like a slum of India, I think, is it over 1 billion that it contributes to your exchequer?
Yes.
And it is the same creative spark that was present in every person on that stage, that's present in you, that's present in me. And
Yes.
sometimes default being gets in the way, or interrupts that, and that's okay. And I found in that such a profound comfort that it's okay to not be perfect all of the time. It's okay to show up as you are and see what happens. It's okay to strive to be your very best self. It's okay to commit fully into doing that, and almost in that sequence. So since coming back, it's like this is really still integrating for me, Ranjan. What are we now, 6 weeks later, But in my work, I talk about default leadership. It's the leadership you have until you awaken to what else is possible. I'm working with companies on default culture versus created culture. This is just another language,
Yes.
a different wrapper, right? Essentially on the same thing. My work with teams has gone really deeper, where I have put this new proposal or new offering into the market about exploring the space between, where very often in that gap between stimulus and response, we have choice. And you and I might refer to it as the infinite possibility choice. But when you're in working relationships, which maybe there is judgment and there's past history and it's the default setting that comes up, that greatly interferes with the listening, with the trust building, with the communication. That was me back in January 21, go, what's this all about? How do I figure this out? And so I've now got this kind of new offering with teams to really step into what does it mean to explore that space. And when it's clear, the upward creativity that's possible, the productivity that's possible, the depth of relationship that's possible, the feeling of being in it together that's possible. And that's just been remarkable. Firstly, that I have the confidence, the courage to really step into that, and yet it feels so easy. And I know other people have talked about being bolder since being in India, and maybe this is my version of that, And so that's kind of the impact in my business. And I've had actually my best business quarter since I got set up. And even in my relationships, I was out for dinner with some group of cousins on Saturday, and they were just saying, "You're alive. What have you done? Is it your hair? What have you done differently?" And and I was just sharing with them that I've experienced this kind of coming home really to myself. And so I'm very, very deeply grateful, Ranjan, that you followed your instinct. You were my man on a mission for the last 6 months that
Thank you
I,
so much.
sometimes borrowed and other times just was really happy that I could create what I'm creating.
Yes.
Because you stepped into your vision, you've given me the courage to step into mine. So, I'm just so grateful. And that, it's funny, we were joking with some friends over the weekend, I said, and after all this time, my friend Jill was right, who said, you have to go to India, you're going to love it,
Yes.
I mean, India just catapulted to #1 place I've ever visited in my heart within about 5 minutes of arriving. And I'm very grateful to the warmth of the Indian people, my experience of service that they really, really, I just felt held in this very warm embrace for every moment that I was there. So I'm deeply, deeply grateful.
Thank you so much, Caroline. I have been experiencing a lot of shift in my relationship with myself or my relationship with my family, which was a top priority for me. And even though in the corporate world we behave nicely, we look nice, and we present ourselves so decently, but on the inside, I knew that there's something blocking in my heart, and I'm unable to connect. My intention was to connect. I would definitely want to love people, but very frankly, I knew that somewhere deep down, I'm unable to feel that in my heart. And I would remember these 9 months of creation as a rebirthing experience, and I was reborn, like, in my heart. I awakened in my heart, and I every next day for me is going deeper and deeper and deeper. And the thing that has shifted for me is how I'm listening, and listening with a lot more of love, listening with a lot more of care. And I, every time I'm coming from judgment, I'm more aware of it now. And on the other side, I have not been gentle with myself my whole life. And I've for most part of my life, it was like proving and proving, and achievement and achievement and achievement. But from that journey, similar to yours, to this journey, where it's like in the moment, where it's like I was taking some notes, and oh my God, the insights that I'm having around the workshops that I'm designing, the coaching programs that I'm designing are like so natural now. And I'm loving, most importantly, I'm loving listening to my kid, listening to my dad now more than ever. And I'm seeing the difference in how they are relating with me now, and how I am relating with them. I think it's just a beginning of something significant that we are creating. And uh, every time I'm coming back to what was created through this moment, I would go back to this message of Steve Harrison, of creation from being. And I know that we have dreams, we have goals, we want to create, but that's not something outside in. We needn't impose that on us. In fact, if we just let it happen and just be actively conscious in this journey, I think there is more possibility of consciously creating what we want to experience while being present. and being available in the moment to ourselves and to everybody around. And I think the impact that I'm seeing in my conversations with my clients or potential clients, oh my God, it's just a few minutes of conversations, and the long messages that I'm receiving from people, the impact those conversations have had on them. I'm so happy to receiving them, but I'm seeing that this has happened through who I have been being since 24th of May, when I first time called Steve Hardison to request him to come to India and to tell him that I'm going to create this. And I remember Steve saying that, Ranjan, this is happening not because of all the action that you took or anything that happened. This is happening because of the commitment that you made to create this. And when people would doubt my confidence, or I not even for a second, I doubted the creation of the event. In spite of so many things that happened, I was so sure, because it was not confidence, it was a conviction that I was coming from. I knew it for some mysterious reason. I knew it that this is going to be the best ever being summit in India. And oh my God, such loving community that we created there. I think we are going to remember this. All of us are going to remember this forever. And thank you for being part of this community. Thank you for being who you are, Caroline. Thank you for creating this experience to share with us your journey. And I think we are going to have many more miracles, many more stories to keep sharing day after day, month after month, and years in this journey.
Yeah, I hope so. Me too, Ranjan, and because it's when, your journey with your family, which was, I suppose very much intertwined with the event, and meeting your children and meeting your dad and listening to how you honored them, in stage. That was just what a remarkable person that you are, a remarkable role model for how it is possible, to do great things and be very human in it, and acknowledge it, and have the compassion for ourselves, around our humanness. Because you mentioned back in the corporate world, and I called my business conscious leadership development.
Yes.
Very deliberately, because it's our humanity that makes us great, not the things that we do. And I think we sometimes lose sight of that in the busyness of life, and that moment where you invited your dad on stage in a day of so many moments. That's the one that has the effect that it has on me now. It was very beautiful to be part of. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Caroline. Thank you so much. And once again, I would like to thank you for this divine stone that you brought. It's a blessing. It's truly a blessing. Thank you so much for all that you're being, and thank you so much for this opportunity of magnificent conversation with me. And I think we are going to have many more lovely conversations.
Yes.
With your conscious creations and discussing about your journey henceforth.
Thank you, Ranjan.
Thank you. Thank you. Love you.